So your final piece of work for week 1, hopefully you've gotten the first 2 activities finished already. Now we're going to look at the Emperor's power weakening. So over time we talked about how the Emperor removed himself from his people and his power began to weaken. If we want to talk about shogunate Japan, the feudal system, which is what we're trying to get to, we need to make sure that we talk about how the Emperor lost his power. So here we go, the Emperor's power weakens. This is a bit of a shorter one for you, won't be too long. After the death of Emperor Kamu in 806, we had a group of weaker emperors start to rule over Japan. So this is Emperor Kamu, here he is. He looks like a nice guy, very powerful, but his sons weren't quite as strong-willed as he was. Their reign resulted in the central government becoming increasingly removed from the daily governing of the provinces. They stayed in their imperial palace and removed themselves from society. And outside the city of Heian-kyo, which you'll remember was that planned city that the emperor lived in, the emperor's power and control grew a little bit weaker. Lords who'd been granted permission by the emperor to own land and administer large rural estates where there's lots of peasants working on them, they were called shogun, started to become more and more powerful. So these administrators started to get a little bit more power. They started to control things more rather than doing what the emperor asked them to. To begin with, shogun were plots of land given to people like Buddhist monks who grew rice crops on them without paying tax to the emperor. So it used to be like a gift to a religious group to say that they were appreciated in society. But when those gifts started being given to loyal nobles and to officials as rewards for service, things started to get out of control a little bit, right? Because those nobles don't need to pay tax on a shogun. That's the rules, right? Shoguns don't have tax paid on them. So the nobles wouldn't have to give up rice and crops to the emperor. They could keep it all for themselves. So over time, these noble families with their stockpiles of food and resources started to become increasingly wealthy and powerful because they controlled the land without any tax, and they also collected the taxes from the peasants living there, which meant that they started to get a lot of power themselves. This meant that these noble families were able to spend money and resources to build up their own private armies. So the emperor wasn't in control of the military anymore. Now these shoguns were, right? The people who owned the shoguns could afford to pay for their own private militaries, so they could protect and police their shogun, right? So these armies now were, instead of fighting for the emperor, were fighting to protect specific locations in Japan. These armies were led by generals known as shoguns and made up of warriors called samurai. Here's a samurai over here. He's got a weird little beady-eyed face. Very strange one. I don't know why I put that picture there or why I'm talking about it. Eventually, the emperor began to depend on these private armies for support because his army wasn't big enough anymore because all these samurai were working for shoguns, which marked the end of the emperor being in control and the start of the shoguns, because as we'll find out next week, when a shogun has lots of power and the emperor doesn't, he can kind of just say, get out of the way, emperor, I'm not interested in you being in charge anymore, I'm the one who's going to be doing all of the ruling around here. So we'll find out more in detail about that next week though. For now, we're going to wrap up our week's worth of history work by doing one last task. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to explain how the system of granting shogun to nobles eventually weakened the power of the emperor. Alright? So your response can be 2 paragraphs long. I'd suggest that's probably the best way to go. The first paragraph, you'll write about the role of the emperor and how his office was created, so how he started off, which you'll find in our first video from a while back on Monday. And then the second paragraph will explain that what shogun are and how they led to the downfall of the emperor. So if I'm writing it, I'm going to say, okay, well, emperors were created because war chiefs became powerful and they claimed that they were descendants from the sun goddess who ruled over the land, and eventually this one chief became more powerful and so he declared himself emperor, and then the emperor moved to Kyoto or Heian-kyo, whatever you want to call it, and then eventually he withdrew from society and he started giving people more land without taxes and blah 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 blah. And then you're in your second paragraph, the land without taxes is called shogun, and they created private armies and all this kind of stuff, and then after you've written all that, then you'll be able to fully explain how that process happened. Now, once you've finished it, before you submit it, I want you to do something that we've not done before. Since you're at home, or if you're at school, you can do this with someone in class, but since you've got people around you who are interested in learning about new things, what you're going to do, once you've finished writing your 2 paragraphs about how the Emperor came to be, and then what Shogun were and how they led to the downfall of the Emperor, what you're going to do is you're going to talk to a parent or caregiver, maybe even a friend of yours, and explain to them how that happened. Because what that'll do is it'll give you an opportunity to see whether or not you're actually making sense. Okay? Because if they've got questions like, what about this? Then you can look into that and add that piece of information in. So ultimately, you're going to have 2 paragraphs worth of writing. It's going to talk about how granting Shogun led to the downfall of the Emperor. You're going to talk about the role of the Emperor, how it was created, how it led to the downfall of emperors after 1,000 years or so, however long it was. That is your job now. Once you've finished that, chuck it up onto Daymap Week 1 formative tasks. You should have 3 pieces of work minimum in there now, the 3 activities that we've done this week. Also, don't forget you've still got your vocab sheet that you need to be working on as well. That'll take a bit of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, so make sure you finish that one. And apart from that, check in again on Monday. There'll be your 2nd week worth of work up there for you to look at. If you're interested in doing a little bit of extension stuff, there'll be another video that goes up today that you can take a look at as well. Thanks. I'm keeping these bits in.